Fallout 3 is a game that has come under increasing scrutiny and criticism over the past few years. Of course, it's always had its critics, mostly from the old Fallout community, but it used to seem like almost everybody loved this game. It received all of these Game of the Year awards, and it sold a shit ton, effectively saving the Fallout franchise during a time when its future was uncertain. Years of mismanagement and poor decision making under Interplay had led to the franchise being sold to Bethesda, who proceeded to make Fallout more accessible to a wider audience. And for as much as Fallout fans like to shit on Bethesda, myself included, most of us probably started with Fallout 3. How could you not look at this badass cover and read the synopsis and not want to buy it immediately? A post-apocalyptic, retro-futuristic FPS RPG with intense violence and a sprawling open world. It sounds too good to be true, and in some ways it is too good to be true. But as a kid I absolutely adored Fallout 3. I had a Brotherhood of Steel iPad cover, a Vault-Tec Christmas jumper that I still own to this day. I would listen to the selection of songs that Galaxy News Radio played around my family, and in like a oh, I'm not like the other kids way. I listened to sophisticated classic music. Anyway, don't worry, the United Nations International Court of Justice did punish me accordingly for those crimes against humanity, so don't worry. I also made a mock-up front cover for a Brotherhood Outcast spin-off game, which has thankfully been lost to time, and overall I just couldn't get enough of it. Thinking back on it now, it was probably my first ever RPG, and as an introduction into those kinds of systems and mechanics, Fallout 3 was great. It had depth with all its skills and perks, but it wasn't overwhelming and was presented plainly and simply, and in a way that was easy to understand and comprehend. The experience was a little more guided than most other RPGs, making it easier to adjust to the world and get used to the mechanics. I owe so much to Fallout 3 for getting me to believe that video games could be more than just Wii Sports or Lego Batman. Even though those games are still peak, don't get me wrong. It solidified this idea in my head that video games could create immersive worlds and expansive mythoses beyond that of any other medium, and for that I am eternally grateful to Fallout 3. With all of that being said, I think it's clear that my connection with Fallout 3 goes deep and that I have a lot of love for it. So a lot of the attacks on the game almost feel personal in an irrational kind of way. Like when people talk about how much better New Vegas is, I'm like, yeah, absolutely 100% I agree with you totally, but also fuck you. I know New Vegas surpasses it in almost every way, but there is still one aspect where I think Fallout 3 doesn't just excel above New Vegas, but every other Fallout game. The feeling of being in a true post-apocalypse. Now, what exactly do I mean by this? Well, most Fallout games outside of one I'll touch on later, although definitely post-apocalyptic, feel like they're set during the end of an era or at the beginning of a new one. Take New Vegas for example. In New Vegas you have multiple organized factions with their own laws and methods of governance spanning multiple settlements. Trade routes have been set up, people pursue careers and run businesses, taxes are collected, there's varying currencies, there's gambling, colourful storefronts, you get the picture. Of course none of these things make the game bad, in fact it's quite the opposite. New Vegas' focus on politics and governance is what makes it such a fascinating and fantastic game. But it's hardly what we think of when we think of an apocalypse. Fallout 3, in contrast, has no brightly lit centers of commerce or large, glamorous gambling parlors. Instead, the capital Wasteland is home to scavengers living off the rotting carcass of a world lost long ago, with survival and immediate threats being the main concern. The closest place to a New Vegas-style location is maybe Megaton or Rivet City, but in my opinion, the businesses set up there feel more thrown together and made purely for survival. Like, the Garrett twins in New Vegas clearly love their jobs and care about growing their business and providing a good service. In Fallout 3, however, the little market stalls in Rivet City feel like they're run by people who don't have a genuine love for business, but are instead just looking for ways to survive. Like, it feels as if they just found like a surplus amount of guns or clothing and shoddily set up a stall in order to make some caps. Moira Brown is probably the closest thing to a New Vegas style vendor, but I think it's pretty apparent that she's an outlier in comparison to everybody else. And of course, New Vegas does have its share of street vendors, but Fallout 3 highlights it in a way that really emphasizes this idea of a struggle for caps and purely survival focused. Speaking of bottle caps, let's talk about that. In New Vegas, caps are still being used as currency, which seems mostly illogical considering that the NCR and Legion all have their own currencies. Even if you aren't a part of either of these nations, it seems much more convenient to adopt the paper money of the NCR over lugging around bottle caps. Fallout 2 even acknowledged this by removing caps entirely, since it doesn't make sense in a more faction-focused, industrialized world. Fallout 3's use of bottle caps as the primary currency, on the other hand, feels more authentic. Like, I imagine that as soon as bartering began between survivors, not having the means to print paper money, someone had the idea to use bottle caps purely out of necessity. It honestly reminds me of how bartering used to work in real life before coins and banknotes were adopted. In case you're unaware, before we adopted what we know now as money, people looking to simplify the process of bartering would often use a common resource like a metal or ore. This would create a more simplified system of bartering and exchanging goods. For example, if something like gold was chosen as a method of bartering, a community may collectively decide that 1 sheep was worth an ounce of gold, 2 sheep were worth 2 ounces, a bow was worth half an ounce, and so on. These aren't accurate numbers, obviously, I'm just using it for the sake of the example. By assigning a clear value to things, it made trading a lot easier, since before this was in place, the actual worth of something could vary drastically from person to person. As an example, let's say you traded in a spear for an axe with one person in particular. That person probably made the trade because they were in need of a spear, or just thought that a spear was equal in its worth to an axe. But let's say you break that axe or something happens to it, or you just want to get another one, but the guy you traded with previously isn't there anymore, so you have to trade with somebody else. You attempt to make the trade again with the spear, but the person refuses because the actual worth of the spear will vary drastically from person to person. And this could be either because they just don't need a spear, or because they just see a spear as not being the same value as an axe. With a system of currency, however, how much something is worth doesn't vary as drastically, and you'll never be in a situation when you don't have something somebody needs. Because like I said before, a spear can vary in its usefulness from person to person, because if somebody doesn't need a spear, then you're just not going to be able to trade with them. But with a currency, because it can be used to buy any good or service, it is now valuable to everybody, and can be used to trade for any amount of things. Of course, the worth of something can vary, but it's not as drastic as it used to be. And the thing that we're actually weighing the value in is consistent. Anyway, with that little lesson in economics out the way, let's go back to the game with multiple clones named Gary.
Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary. Gary.
In all seriousness though, the actual economics behind something like bottle caps, at least in Fallout 3 and Fallout 1, makes actual sense, since they are widespread enough to where anyone can find at least a few of them, but not so common to the point where you could find hundreds of them lying around. Because if there was too much of it, you'd have to raise prices to accommodate for this increased supply of bottle caps or whatever currency we're using for this. Then you'd get a similar situation to what happened with Germany in the 1920s and 30s, where people would have to wheelbarrow amounts of money around just to buy some bread. Anyway, enough boring ass uni economics. Another difference between Fallout 3 and its depiction of the Wasteland is the infrastructure of the world. What does this mean exactly? Well, it means the way that the world is connected and how settlements interact with each other, at least by my definition for the purposes of this video. In New Vegas, almost every settlement you come across will have heard of the NCR Legion or Mr. House, with some even having history within these organizations. Different settlements interact with each other through trade, travel between settlements is fairly common if still dangerous, and settlements even advertise themselves in order to attract business and tourism. In contrast, most settlements in the capital Wasteland are completely isolated. Sure, you'll have one guy in the saloon talking about how he's been to Tenpenny Tower or Little Lamplight, but largely, most of these settlements are completely unaware of any other settlements existing and are simply happy to just be surviving on their own. The Republic of Dave isn't trying to drum up tourism or attract new investors. Big town residents aren't leaving to explore the larger world, and the people in Rivet City have no idea either of those places exist. It honestly reminds me a lot of early Walking Dead stories before Negan's arrival, where the main goal is literally just to survive. In those first few volumes, and I guess seasons to, correlate it to the TV show, they aren't thinking about attracting trade to their settlement. They aren't concerned with what kind of currency they should establish, and they have very little knowledge of the world outside of their little bubble. Of course, Fallout 3's world is a little bit more developed than the Walking Dead world, but I absolutely love the middle ground it stands in, between early Walking Dead style, there's no factions, there's no governments, it's only about surviving, and New Vegas's people are starting to get ready for civilization again, and countries are starting to prop up. It's such a unique area of the apocalypse to explore, and it makes the game world so interesting to traverse. I just love how you can go from an anti-slaver camp set up in a blown-up office building with characters committed to making the world a better place, to a town in which an ant supervillain fights a robot superhero within a 5-minute walk. This could come across as tonally bizarre, but I think that's the point. Because of how isolated these communities are, they develop in entirely unique and separate ways. There's so much variety in Fallout 3's world, especially when it comes to the side quests, and I honestly think that goes a little underappreciated. Like, the variety of the locations and the stories told there is actually insane. Like, think about it, you've got Vault 108 to the Oasis to Tranquility Lane to Andale to Tenpenny Tower, Little Lamplight. All of these places almost feel like little episodes in an anthology series where they tell their own little stories, and I absolutely love that. I do think New Vegas has the better side quests in terms of the variety of the outcomes and how each one plays into the larger story, as well as the faction system, but there's something so fun about the more self-contained adventures you can have in Fallout 3, and I don't think they should be dismissed entirely. What makes the exploration and stumbling upon these side quests even better is the aesthetic look of Fallout 3's world. I know it's a popular sentiment to call every Fallout game ugly, but honestly I really like how the games look in the Gamebryo engine, that being Fallout 3 and New Vegas. I just absolutely love the style. For as much as people rag on the character models, for example, I think their facial animations are really strong and still hold up. I also just love how everything looks visually. Like, Fallout 4 may have objectively better graphics, but the designs of the super mutant ghouls and feral ghouls are much better in the Gamebryo engine in my opinion. In terms of landscapes and landmarks, Fallout 3 surpasses every other Fallout game in my opinion. Most of the other games in the series are set in deserts with very little change in the landscape or fauna from the pre-war era, but Fallout 3's scorched and grey wasteland is a drastic change from the green rolling hills and forests that should be populating its landscape. I think this more striking visual contrast with the pre-war world makes this game not only feel more like an apocalypse, but also further highlights the darker aspects of the series. Like, I've genuinely had times when I've just been exploring the world and have just stopped and wondered like what this plot of land used to be, or what this building used to be for, and it really gets you thinking about the past and what happened to these people. This is multiplied tenfold when you get to the more urban sprawls, and I honestly think like the main DC hub in Fallout 3 is one of my favorite places to explore in the entire Fallout series. And those grey, broken buildings really reinforce this sad, hopeless tone. People tend to decry the goofier, more comedic elements of Fallout, with many seeing Fallout 1 as the only real, tonally dark entry in the series, but Fallout 3 has its moments, and a lot of its darker moments aren't directly communicated to the player, but are instead implied through visual storytelling. This is something that's in every Fallout game, but I think Fallout 3 does it particularly well. Fallout 3's selection of music also helps a ton in this regard, as a lot of the songs that Fallout 3 chooses tend to be a little bit sadder, and Fallout has always had great music, but Fallout 3's selection in particular just really fits the tone and the mood of the setting. I just love how gone to shit everything looks, and I think the grey colour palette really helps reinforce that, almost like you're constantly walking on the rubble and debris of the old world, even out in nature. nature. The interiors look really good too, like I love the cracks in the walls and the chipping paint, it just all looks so great. Everything feels its age, which is something personally I feel like Fallout 4 kind of missed the mark on, because a lot of its architecture and just its style looks way too washed out and bleached. Fallout New Vegas and especially Fallout 3 in contrast feel appropriately decayed and crumbling. Two expansions for Fallout 3 are also notable when it comes to their visuals, those being the Pit and Point Lookout. The Pit has this borderline hellish atmosphere, as if the entire decaying city is cooking in this furnace of smog, and Point Lookout's foggy swamps and marshes conjure images of the Friday the 13th franchise. It's such a shame, in my opinion at least, that no other Fallout game has managed to recapture the atmosphere of 3. New Vegas is my personal favourite Fallout game, and like I've said before, it's pretty much superior to 3 in almost every way, but I still don't get that same sense of awe and excitement of exploration that I got in Fallout 3. It's so strange because I can acknowledge and even agree with the points against 3, and understand that in a lot of ways it isn't a traditional Fallout game, but it's still just so much fun to explore and so atmospheric to me. And I know it could have been so much better than it ended up being, and I know it could have been a better Fallout game, but I still think it's a great game. I honestly feel this way about every Fallout game though, even 4 and 76, which are my least favourites by far, but even they have their moments. Like 76 has some fantastic locations and vistas. It is the best looking Fallout game by far, just purely graphically. It honestly might have been my favourite world, and it might have even surpassed 3, but it just has nothing interesting to do in it. And 4, even though I can acknowledge that it's pretty much just a worse version of 3 in a lot of the ways it repeats things that 3 did, but just worse, but I still love the settlement mechanic. I know the settlement system was fairly controversial, but honestly for me it is my favourite thing about Fallout 4, and if it wasn't there I would have very little reason to go back and play 4. I just love the concept of finding a plot of land and building up this community in this nice little place and managing things. It's just such a cool idea, and it definitely could have been expanded more, but I still think it's the best thing that Fallout 4 introduced, because in my opinion pretty much everything else Fallout 4 changed or introduced was for worse, but that's a rant for another day. So in conclusion, Fallout 3 is a flawed game that pales in comparison to what came before and after in terms of its story and the depth of its role-playing mechanics. But it's also a great immersive experience with all of these memorable side quests, locations, and a haunting atmosphere that deserves to be held in much higher regard and not dismissed based upon what came after. Can a game that basically kick-started my appreciation for video games as an art form truly be shallow garbage? Can it truly be a disgrace to the Fallout series when it practically saved it and laid the foundation for New Vegas to be built off of? Can it be this creatively bankrupt corporate product when it has so many memorable side quests and locations? I don't think so, and maybe if you play it again or play it for the first time you'll agree with me, maybe you won't, but with all that being said, I'm Christian Cryers, and thanks for watching. Hello everybody, sorry for the whispering. It's fairly late at night and there are people sleeping, so this is just think of this as an ASMR outro or whatever. I don't know if there's been Fallout ASMR, maybe there's some overlap there. If there has been, I will put it in the video, because you know I like to just put whatever bullshit I can find in these post-video things, so maybe I'll put that in there if it exists. If it doesn't, I'll try and find something else, but regardless, thank you for watching. I think in this video I didn't emphasize enough this being a introductory RPG. Like, I think it's super important to, of course, have these super deep, complex, old school RPGs, but also having something that is a good entry point to people, because I think a lot of people can get turned off by something like the classic Fallout games just on their own because of how impenetrable they can seem. So I think it's important to have something accessible. I think Fallout 4 was too accessible, and I think it dumbed down things too much, but I think Fallout 3 had a good balance of accessible enough for a wide audience, but it still has, you know, things that you know, old school fans can enjoy. It's still got your perks and skills. It's got a lot of your good Fallout stuff. But anyway, let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know what you think of this ASMR. Should I keep this? Is this going to be something new to the channel? Regardless, this video took a while just because I had some uni work to do, and it sort of demotivated me a bit. I can't talk, but yeah, I've sort of got over that hump, and the video should be out fairly soon, at least from my perspective. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. 400k on the zombie video is insane. Thank you so much. Over 3k subscribers now is also fucking insane, and I can't thank you enough, honestly. And if you are feeling generous, I do have my Kofi page. It will be where you can just tip whatever amount you wish. I will put that in the pinned comment and in the description. Of course, no pressure to. It's just if you want, if you just want to give me a little motivator, but you know, no pressure, obviously. But thank you so much for watching, and love you guys. Love you. Bye.